Hi Booktube, and welcome to a new video. This is going to be a tag video. This is the Under the Influence of Booktube tag, which was originated by a book olive, although the version I watched with Steve Donohue's. And this is all about the influence of Booktube and how it may have changed your reading and viewing habits and all that sort of thing. I am slightly racing against time here. There might be an interruption because those of you who watched last week's video on my bookshelf disaster, I'm expecting some more to be delivered today. So the bell might go at any moment and I might have to break this off, but let's see how far we get. Okay, so question one. What is a fantastic book you've read from the recommendation of another booktuber? And oppositely, what's a book that you were talked out of reading because of a booktuber's review? Well, in terms of books that I read on recommendation, I actually did a video called Thank You Booktube, which is a shout out to all the booktubers who'd recommended me specific books that I've read this year. And I'll post a link to that video because there's 15 to 20 books that I wouldn't have come across or heard of without Booktube, and for which I was very, very grateful. But I'm just going to specify two or three. I'm not even sure if they were on the list because I might have come to them since I posted that video. So the first one was A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Mara, which was recommended by Sean the Book Maniac. It's his second favourite book of all time. And I buddy read that with Curtis Reeds and we both absolutely loved it. 5-star read. So that was definitely down to Sean because I'd never heard of Anthony Mara, even though I think he's reasonably well known. The second is down to Curtis Books and Books, who turned me on to Dennis Johnson, who was a writer that I'd heard of but sort of hadn't really reached out to sort of actually read any of his stuff. But Curtis sold me on him and I read two of his books so far this year and loved them both. So that's down to Curtis. And the third is the Early King and the Kid in Yellow, I think that's what it's called, by Danny Denton. It's a debut novel which I certainly wouldn't have heard of had I not have seen Liv Hooper talk about it on Liv's Book Nook. And again, that turned out to be a 5-star read. So they're just three examples, but there are many, many more, as I say in my video. And as for a book that I was talked out of reading, I'm not sure that could ever happen. But a version of it was Jennifer, insert literary pun here, undertook the manful or possibly womanful task of reading all the long-listed books on the women's price of fiction for 2018. And sort of confirmed really that I didn't want to read most of them. I think there was an element of regret in quite a few of the books from Jennifer. I hope I'm not doing her a disservice in saying that. I'd read 3 on that list before the list was published, just because I like those authors. I have since bought Elif Boutman's The Idiot. I haven't read it yet. And I will read Jesse Greengrass's Sight. The reason I haven't read that so far is because it sort of overlaps in sort of theme and approach to my own novel, so I'm giving a sort of space of time before I read that. And then the only book I've read from that list since that list was published was Camilla Shamsi's Home Fire, which won the prize. And I've got a dedicated video on that, and I didn't really enjoy it very much. So I haven't been expressly put off, but I'm very grateful for Jennifer for doing all the spade work in going through that list of 12 or 16 titles, whatever it was, and helping me appreciate that, I think, yeah, 2 books that I hadn't read of the list that I would engage with, but the rest I really wouldn't. The problem with that prize is it's so wide in terms of comparing, serious literary fiction with commercial fiction. I've never really understood how any prize is able to do that, how any judging panel is supposed to compare books that are doing entirely different things. Okay, question 2. Has Booktube opened your mind or changed your mind about any genres? No, it hasn't. I know what I like. I have an ability to sort of, track down and refer books based on what I've already read. Having said that, I'm very grateful to Booktube for expanding the sort of the dragnet for that. But I will say one thing. I do read science fiction. I don't read a lot of it, but I do read it. But what I've been very grateful to Booktube this year is it's recommended me, because I'm not really plugged into sort of science fiction in terms of, what the classics are, who the great names. There are plenty of classic titles that I've missed, and Booktube this year has plugged me into 2 or 3. One was Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. One was His Master's Voice by Stanislaw Lem. Now, I've read quite a lot of Lem, but I hadn't read that one, and that was recommended to me by I think it was Mitchell Axler. Can't remember. So in a very specific, narrow genre that I do read in occasionally, Booktube has been very helpful in helping me add titles to read in that. Question 3: how much time did you spend on YouTube before Booktube, and how much time do you spend on it now? Well, I can't put a time on it, but I didn't watch a lot of YouTube. A few music videos, some true crime stuff, but not much really. And now Booktube, obviously I do, I watch, every time a new video is flagged on my timeline, I watch. It's also very useful in my lunch hour at work. More often than not, I'll watch some YouTube videos, catch up on them then. So yeah, I mean, it has increased the time I spend on YouTube, I guess, but I can't put a sort of figure on it. Question 4: how many books did you read per month per year before Booktube, and how many do you read now? Well, I know exactly. Last year I read 54 books, and this year, what are we, sort of 1st of September, I've already read 66, so it has exponentially increased my reading. Partly because it's given me a lot more recommendations, and I've been very reactive. If I see something someone's talked about and it sounds interesting, I will go and get it, even if it's then going to remain on a TBR pile, which is something I probably wouldn't have done in the past. So it's there, before I forget it, because I've got so much going through my head, I'll nail it down and buy it. So it has definitely increased my reading because I'm getting more recommendations, not because I'm making videos and I feel I need to read more in order to keep making videos. It's not that at all. Question 5: has Booktube affected your book buying habits? If so, are you pleased or displeased by this? Well, as I've just said, yes, it has. I'm buying a lot more sort of on impulse. I mean, it's not on impulse because it's informed by watching somebody's review, but I'm being much more reactive and getting hold of stuff. I'm buying a lot more new releases, which is something I never used to do, simply because I wasn't plugged in. I wasn't aware what was coming out when. I still don't have access to sort of advanced warning lists. I wish I did. Maybe some kind Booktuber can take pity on me and afford me a link to where I can see what's coming out in 2019, for example. So it's definitely increased my book buying, and because I'm getting new releases, sometimes that means I'm getting more hardbacks. I was almost always exclusively paperback, but I have bought more hardbacks this year, and I'm pleased by it. If I was displeased by it, I wouldn't do it. I'm not a masochist. Okay, question 6: has a review by a Booktuber ever retroactively made you reconsider your stance on a book? It hasn't. If someone reviewed a book that I'd read and I had a very divergent opinion on them, I would have to go back and reread the book myself before agreeing with them and changing my previous view. But we all know that thing of, a book is read in a specific time. So if I read a book in my 20s and went back and read it now, it'd probably be different anyway. But I can't think of a single book where I've changed my own mind because of what I've seen on Booktube without having gone back and delved back into the book myself. Question 7: are there any videos you've been inspired to make after seeing another Booktuber's videos? Have you ever felt inspired by another Booktuber's style, their video style, their book organisation style, their personal style, anything? Well, videos you've been inspired to make after seeing another Booktuber's videos, there's several, because before I joined Booktube, I was making book review videos and posting them, but I didn't know there was this thing called Booktube. And when I did, and when I joined, I retrospectively went back and tagged them all Booktube, because they were the same thing as I was doing. But what I've learned from Booktube, apart from tags, which I didn't know they existed, but these sort of more one-off for me, they're not one-off for other Booktubers. For me, I've learned about unboxing. I've done one unboxing video, but I don't normally buy enough books to, at one time to make regular unboxing videos. Unhaul video. I tried one where I wanted to unhaul books by doing it through a book swap. So I sort of, touted all these books that I wanted to get rid of, and if anyone was interested in the UK, we could swap them. But that didn't draw comments on down below, but didn't draw a single book swap. So that was a bit of a damp squib. TBR piles, because I've never, until this year probably, I've never really had significant TBR piles. I tended to buy just 2 or 3 books ahead, but now, because I want to remember stuff that people have recommended me, I go out and buy it. I've also got more involved in sort of sort of literary prize lists, and trying to read stuff off that and frame it as my take on the prize. So I did that particularly this year for the Man Booker International. I might have done it for the not the Booker, but unfortunately, not unfortunately, because I'm nominated and shortlisted on it, I don't feel I can. I had to recuse myself from doing that. So I'm reading some of the books on the list, but I just can't publicly review them because that doesn't seem right. I might have done the Booker Prize this year, but there were only 2 titles on that long list that even sounded vaguely of appeal, so I didn't think that was, going to yield anything useful. So I've done all those sorts of videos with mixed results. I think, the tone of my channel is, sort of serious literary fiction, and I'm not sure it necessarily lends itself to things like unhauls and unboxings and things like that. TBRs, you can't really go wrong with those, although I've done a couple of TBRs. I did the intimidating TBR tag, which was good, but I also did one which wasn't a tag, I just did it myself, called my slightly underwhelming TBR pile, as it was at that point. I'm glad to report since that it's got much more inviting. And as to the other part of the question, have you ever felt inspired by another booktuber's style? Well, I have very little technical ability and I have very little resources, so this is pretty gonzo style booktubing that I do. But I have sort of dipped my toe in the water of vlogging. I mean, Sean the Bookmaniac is a brilliant vlogger, because he goes around, the parts of Tokyo in his neighbourhood and sort of films himself on the go and reading and talking about books in settings, which I would never consider doing. I don't feel I have the ability or the equipment to do it, but I do have a little video camera. Brilliantly, I'd thrown away the power pack for it, when you sort of plug it into charge, because I didn't I used it so infrequently, I didn't recognise what this plug was and thought it was just some old sort of junk that was still knocking about, so I threw it away. But when I sort of wanted to dip my toe in the vlogging world, I realised that, my camera had no charge in it, so I went out on Amazon and bought a new one, and so I've done a scavenger hunt tag because my library is outside in my garden shed, so I did that as a sort of vlog. Last week I did putting up a bookshelf as a sort of vlog. So I guess I might explore that a bit more. The problem is I don't have an external mic for that video camera, because it's only the video camera's like an old mobile phone. It's only that big. So I don't think I could do one outside in the road, because the background noise would be too great. So not directly influenced by other booktubers, no. 8. What are some pressures you feel on your reading life because of your channel? Well, I don't really feel any, other than the channel obviously generates a pressure to keep producing content. Now that doesn't mean I read any quicker because I have to, generate stuff for content, but it's more that I tend to yield to talking about every single book I've read, which I wouldn't have before. I think that's the only pressure. Because at the moment I'm not publishing reviews because of, as I say, I've recused myself being on the not the Booker list. I'm not talking about hardly any books at all for 2 months, and I find that quite difficult, because that's what I was doing before I joined Booktube, and that's why Booktube seemed to suit my purposes, because I like talking about books in a bit of depth. So I'm finding that a bit hard. So somewhere there's a balance between not doing it at all, which is a temporary thing I'm stuck in the minute, but talking about every single book, which I don't really want to do, because I found this on Goodreads as well. Not every book do you actually want to sort of, expend 10, 15 lines of stuff that you want to say on Goodreads, or 5 minutes talking to a camera. So I feel I need to slightly wean myself off that and just talk about the books I want to talk about, good, bad or indifferent. It's not that I won't talk critically about books I didn't enjoy. It's just I need to stop talking about every single book that I've read, I think. 9. In a way, if any, do you feel the social element of the community has impacted your reading? Do you think about books differently since joining? Well, I'm not sure I do, but the two social aspects that I really wouldn't have imagined before I discovered Booktubers, I've mentioned them both. Well, one is buddy reads. Well, at the moment I've only done one, but I've got at least one lined up next year with Jason, Old Blues Chapter and Verse. We're doing Ulverton. And I've also put out a bid if anyone wants to do James Joyce's Ulysses next year. I'm up for that. So that seems a brilliant way of reading books that you might otherwise sort of put off, because it sort of forces you to actually confront them. And the other is, as I say, book prizes. So I've never really been that. Before I joined Booktube, I used to follow the man Booker, and the year that Howard Jacobson won, there were 3 books on that shortlist of 6 that I'd read. Damon Galgut's In a Strange Room, I think it was called, Tom McCarthy's Sea, and Emma Donoghue's Room. And any of those would have made a worthy winner. And when they gave it to Jacobson, who wrote exactly the same book as he's always written, so I felt it was an award for his career rather than that specific book. I think it was called The Finkler Question. I lost interest in the man Booker. And I haven't really followed prizes at all since then. And when The Power won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, and I read it in my book club and thought it was a dreadful book, that sort of only hardened up my sort of scepticism about book prizes. But slowly through Booktube and watching people like Peg, the literary prize addict, do it with such charm and grace, and watch Jennifer, insert literary puns, treatment of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and treat it in the most serious way, that I've actually sort of softened on book prizes. And as I say, I sort of shadowed and did some of the stuff on the Man Booker International Prize this year. And then lo and behold, I found myself on a prize shortlist myself. So that seems to be the cherry on the top. So yes, and of course, all the other thing is about the comments, which is the best thing. I will always answer every single comment I get, because I'm very grateful for people taking the time, A, to watch, and B, to comment and interact. And I feel that I certainly want to be giving them the time back to respond to what they say. 10. What influence do you hope your own channel will have on the Booktube community and or other aspiring Booktubers? Well, it's very simple for me. It's why I started making book reviews, as I say, before I discovered Booktube. That's just to put out some books out there into the world, into the online world, that don't get a lot of attention. I want to represent the Bell's Lettrers posse, so throwing the BL book gang sign there. And also to give a perspective of, I am a writer, and I read as a writer, so with a writer's kind of perspective or filter on. I think that may or may not be interesting to people as a approach. So first of all, it's to put books out on Booktube that don't get a lot of coverage. And second of all, it's to give an insight, slightly from the inside as a writer, as to maybe what these other writers are doing or trying to do in their books. And I think that's it really. I'm doing it for the books and the people who might read the books more than the Booktubers. I mean, my channel has nothing to sort of no sort of style of its that that's worth recommending to anyone, because it's pretty stripped down and bare. I will say that some of the tags, I hope that they're comedic, because I do take liberties with some of them. So I did the 28 more questions, which Steve Donoghue had originated, and I really went to town with that. I had a lot of fun. So sometimes I just go all out and just be as subversive as I can. But that's about it, really. So thanks to Steve and Olive for a really incisive tag that really makes you think about your relationship to Booktube and why you're doing it. And so till next time, thanks very much. I can see my bookshelves haven't arrived. I'm beginning to fear they might not arrive today, being Saturday, which means I won't get them till God knows when, because no one, my son's always asleep when the postman comes, so he never answers the door when they ring, which means it goes back to the sorting office. And, there's 3 of these bookshelves and they're really heavy. Okay, so till next time.